Good evening, and hopefully everybody can hear me. I think we're on. I just want to say a personal mazel tov to all the new board members in every category that there is, to all of our guests, and especially to you, Andrew Friedson. I do not live in Montgomery County. I swim across the river to get here. But when I heard of your accomplishments just here this evening, it was really just wonderful. This is a tough world right now, so thank you for all you do, and to your family. Best wishes. And good evening and welcome to everybody that I haven't already welcomed. If I don't know you, I'm Cookie Heimer-Blitz. I am a past president of JCRC, and as you can see, we have a lot of past presidents. Many of them are here this evening doing all kinds of great things. I think that's one of the most rewarding parts of JCRC, because I was president a little while ago, that so many of our past presidents stay engaged in meaningful ways, which really is very special in an organizational, institutional sense. I am also the current co-chair, along with Rick Goldstein, of the Domestic Affairs Commission. And in 2023, our committee produced a JCRC policy resolution entitled Protecting Democracy in America and Enhancing Civil Political Discourse, a New Commandment for Our Times. A real mouthful, but we need it. Back then, I personally had no clue just how relevant and meaningful this document would become. Since January 20th, our country has seen a raft of policy changes leading to numerous legal challenges and the potential for a constitutional crisis, although there are many that would say that has already happened and we're in the midst of it. We have also seen public dialogue become ever more toxic and polarized. It's no exaggeration to say that we are all concerned, albeit perhaps for different reasons, about the health of our sacred democracy. Our guests tonight are going to address the Jewish role in preserving that democracy, strengthening election integrity, and bridging the divide so that we can engage in civil, nuanced conversations together. Their full bios are in your program. I encourage you to read them if you haven't already, but for now, let me just introduce Amy Spitalnick, who is the CEO of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, known as JCPA, and Aaron Dorfman, Executive Director of A More Perfect Union. So welcome, and let's just get right to it. We have a lot to cover. So let's start by asking both of you, what do you see as the top threats to democracy right now?
Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. JCPA is a national partner to JCRCs around the country, and it's a particular pleasure to work with Ron and the JCRC team here, and I'm just so grateful for everything they do, and honored to be a part of this program, particularly with Aaron, who is my neighbor in Brooklyn, and we oftentimes schlep to a city far away to hang out together.
Next time at our
Yeah. So look, you know, it's really easy to sort of narrow in on any of the frightening things that are happening right now as the greatest threat. And I would say really it's more the holistic normalization of broader anti-democratic extremism and conspiracy theories, because it's that broader normalization of extremism that underpins all of the things that we're seeing happening. So at their core, conspiracy theories are meant to sow distrust in our institutions and our democracy, to pit communities against one another, to make us believe that our government, that our institutions, that are not actually working for us. And we see how that plays out with their impacts that have increased dramatically over the last, 4 months? I don't even know what time is anymore. And so whether it is these conspiracy theories fueling dehumanizing policies, targeting a variety of communities, including immigrants, diversity, equity, and inclusion writ large, or a variety of other things, whether it's being used to attack the rule of law, due process, fundamental civil liberties, whether it's to attack our institutions, gutting billions of dollars in funding from our academic institutions, from the arts, from a variety of other entities, whether it's weaponizing the federal government, DOJ, and other tools that have been created to effectively suppress dissent and use the levers of the federal government to say, this sort of conversation is okay, and these sorts of perspectives are not. at the core of all of this is this normalization of these conspiracy theories and extremism that are the tools used to then advance this broader attack on our norms and our institutions and the rule of law that have been so central to our safety as Jews and the safety of so many other communities for generations.
Yeah, plus one to all of that. I'll just, by way of quick introduction, I'm Aaron Dorfman. I run this organization called A More Perfect Union, the Jewish Partnership for Democracy, which is a 3.5-year-old network of about now 200 Jewish organizations around the country that are working together to protect and strengthen American democracy. You asked about the most urgent, right?
You can talk about whatever you like. There's many to choose
so
from.
It's a hot mess out there, but I will say that the way that we are talking and thinking about the threats to American democracy right now starts with a really important acknowledgement, which is that threats to democracy don't exist on one side of the spectrum or the other, political spectrum. There are real and present threats to American democracy that come from the American left. I could go on at length about those, but right now, the greatest threats to American democracy come from the political right. And we tend to talk about those in sort of 4 categories. The first is threats to the separation of powers at the federal level. The executive, since January 20th, has been encroaching on constitutionally mandated powers of Congress and of the judiciary in ways that erode one of the kind of core principles of American democracy, which is that power should be decentralized, right? If you look back at the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, you can read those documents as having essentially one function: no more kings. Right? We wanted no more kings, and the way we did that brilliantly, the founders, was to separate power. They gave some power to Congress, they gave some power to the executive, they gave some power to the judiciary, they gave a lot of power to the states so that the federal government wouldn't have it, and the executive under President Trump since January 20th has been steadily eroding that set of separation of powers. That's a real problem. The second is attacks on other sources of power that exist outside government. Right? One of the other amazing things about the United States is that we've got hugely decentralized sources of power. We have a business community. We have civil society, synagogues, churches, all of the nonprofits that make up American civil society. And the Trump administration has really been undermining the independence of those institutions. Law firms, colleges and universities, threatening to revoke 501c3 status from nonprofit organizations. That's another way that democracy, one of the kind of core bedrock parts of democracy, is being threatened. The third is around civil liberties, right? If the second is threats against institutions, the third is threats against individuals. And that's what we see when people are being arrested and deported without due process, when they're being denied the right of habeas corpus, attacks on individuals, the weaponization of the Justice Department to investigate individuals. There was just an investigation launched against Andrew Cuomo in New York State, clearly an attempt to intimidate individuals and prevent them from acting out in opposition to the federal government. And the fourth really is to pick up on what Amy was saying, is the undermining of democracy and the kind of valorization of authoritarianism. And this is like a steady drumbeat of criticism of democracy, criticism of our partners around the world who are committed to liberal democracy, and the kind of elevation of authoritarian governments as models of what we should be aspiring to, which is the opposite of the way America has operated historically.
Great, thanks. Yeah. You know, the Jewish community, like every other community, is made up of various perspectives. So in this diverse, shall we say, climate, how do you bring a specifically Jewish lens to your democracy work, and how can you manage to do that without getting all caught up in partisan battles?
I can start and pass it to Aaron. You know, our work at JCPA is really rooted in the recognition that Jewish safety and inclusive democracy go hand in hand. There's no such thing as truly inclusive, multiracial, multi-faith democracy in America if the Jewish community isn't truly safe. And so too is the Jewish community not safe if we're not protecting our democratic norms and institutions and the rights and safety of all communities. So it's this two-way street. And this is true for a number of reasons. I talked earlier about how conspiracy theories are at the core of this attack on our democracy and how they're used to sow distrust in our institutions. At its core, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. Certainly it's hatred of Jews because of who we are, what we look like, how we pray or don't pray. But anti-Semitism is also uniquely this insidious, pernicious conspiracy theory rooted in tropes and lies about Jewish control and power. We saw it in Charlottesville. I spent years working on litigation against those responsible for the violence. The Jews will not replace us. Conspiracy theory that has also fueled a cycle of broader anti-Semitic, racist, and xenophobic attacks, including the deadliest attack on our community in US history in Pittsburgh in 2018. And those invasion, replacement ideas have really sown broader distrust in our democracy, now underpin specific policies targeting immigrants and other communities, and have become really normalized. And we also see these conspiracy theories on the left, certainly before October 7th, but especially post-October 7th, in conspiracy theories related to Jewish or Zionist control and power, related to our government, related to dual loyalty with Israel, or a variety of the other forms it takes. And so ultimately, we see how anti-Semitism is used as this tool to undermine democracy, to sow distrust in our institutions, and to pit communities against one another in a way that harms not just Jews, but each and every community in our democracy. And so too as democratic norms and institutions, as the rule of law is eroded, it makes things much more likely it makes it much more likely that anti-Semitism will flourish, because the conditions are there for people to be looking for a scapegoat, for things to be going badly, and we know that the Jewish community is so often among the first targeted when that happens. So we're in this feedback loop in which anti-Semitism is increasingly normalized in the form of these conspiracy theories, undermining our democracy. And so too, as democracy is undermined, it makes things less safe for Jews in a way that is ultimately going to not only increase anti-Semitism, but cut to the core of what has really been essential to Jewish safety in this country for generations. And so we can't think of this as a partisan issue. We have to think about it as an issue of fundamental Jewish safety, of inclusive democracy, and of the ways in which these things are inextricably linked. They're not at odds with one another. They're actually one and the same.
Yeah, so I'll again echo what Amy said, and I think the flip side of that story about the threat that anti-Semitism poses to American Jews is the kind of miraculous quality that this country has had for American Jews, right? This is the first country in human history, since in the 2,000 years of diasporic existence for Jews, where we arrived equal partners in creating what America is, right, and what this country is about. There's an amazing clause in Article 6 of the Constitution before the First Amendment, which we lean on so much, that says that no religious test shall be required of any person running for public office in the United States. That was something that had never happened before. So we spent 2,000 years as supplicants dependent on the goodwill of rulers in the countries where we lived. And when we arrived here, we were equal citizens. And it's an extraordinary thing. It's, I think, one of the fundamental necessities behind Jewish thriving in this country. So how do we like navigate that? How do we support that from a nonpartisan standpoint? In our case, we're laser focused on one thing, which is protecting and preserving liberal democracy in this country. And part of how we discipline ourselves around that is that we acknowledge a huge range of diverse perspectives on issues. We don't think about democracy as an issue. Democracy is not an issue. It's the sandbox in which we work out all of the issues that we care about. And we recognize that there are totally legitimate, vehemently strong disagreements around abortion, around gun rights and gun safety, around Israel, around immigration. And we steer widely clear of any of those, because the only thing we care about is preserving the system that makes debate about those issues possible in a way that doesn't allow people to resort to violence. So our dodge is stay clear of everything that people have legitimate disagreements about and harness their collective agreement and commitment to democracy.
Great. And Aaron, you touched on what we've seen very shockingly, at least to me, the arrest of public officials, the judge of Wisconsin, the mayor of New Jersey, lack of due process for individuals who have been deported, arrested, detained, and particularly close to the heart for, I think, everyone in this room, is the wrongful deportation of a Maryland man who still sits in the Salvadorian prison. There have also been public discussions regarding the possible suspension of habeas corpus, which is the requirement of a legal basis for imprisonment. How are your organizations responding to these very disturbing events? And I think you've talked a bit about why it has broader implications or how it does. So any way you want to enhance that for both of you, questions for both of you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we have actually been very selective about when and how we use our public voice on these issues, and have spoken up really in two moments when particularly anti-Semitism has been weaponized as part of an attempt to erode democratic norms and institutions. Those two instances were the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil in Columbia University in New York City, and the attack on Harvard University, both of which made us not super popular in certain parts of the Jewish community, but they felt like particular moments where the Jewish community was being used as a wedge to justify things that we consider deeply threatening to democracy. So we spoke out publicly on those. Most of our work, though, has been behind the scenes, trying to sort of elevate and celebrate acts of political courage on the part of the Jewish community, and particularly Jewish leaders. I'll give you one very specific example. About 6 weeks ago, Adam Lehman, who's the CEO of Hillel International, who I'm sure you can imagine has been under some pressure over the last 20 months, right? He's got to have a hard job. Adam Lehman put out a public statement that was a remarkably brave statement. He said, we have a terrible problem with anti-Semitism in this country, and it is affecting Jewish students on college campuses, and that has to end. And our colleges and universities have failed to protect Jewish students from that anti-Semitism. And here's the kicker, we can't allow those needs to be used to violate the free speech and due process rights of other people. And like as soon as we saw this statement come out, we knew Adam Lehman was going to get blasted by certain parts of the Jewish community for taking a step like this. And we organized a bunch of funders and allies of Hillel to reach out to him and get his back and be like, exactly, that is exactly the kind of nuanced stance we need in a moment when we're all being pushed into political binaries. So we're looking for places and spaces where quiet, kind of behind-the-scenes diplomacy can encourage political courage and kind of resist those, particularly the weaponization of anti-Semitism.
Wholeheartedly agree with and echo the importance of everything Aaron just described, including that Hillel statement and the role of sort of stealing other leaders who are sticking their necks out. Our role at JCPA is really twofold. Because we work with JCRCs and others around the country, we also do a lot of behind-the-scenes work to make sure that local communities, whether they are JCRCs and local federations, whether they're rabbis, whether they're national partners, sort of have the tools and resources to navigate these questions, including the exploitation of anti-Semitism in this moment, in a way that is constructive and nuanced and actually, I think, reflective of where the community is. And we can talk more about that, I'm sure, over the course of this discussion. And also at the core, we're a national advocacy organization. We're a public affairs organization. And so our role is really to also help bring together coalitions, both within the Jewish community and across communities, to make clear what our positions and our values are in this moment. And so while it feels like we're drinking out of a fire hose, because we've tried to find the moments where our voice could be most impactful. In early February, we worked with a number of organizations on a statement focused on how we protect the rule of law in this country, how the importance of the rule of law has been to the Jewish community and our history, the weaponization of the federal government, the gutting of federal funding, using it as a tool. This was before the Mahmoud Khalil arrest, before everything that has followed. And I think that was an important statement that sort of drew a line in the sand about where a vast majority of Jewish Americans really are. If you look at the polling, it tells us that Jews are voting on issues like democracy, even if democracy, as I agree with Aaron, is not an issue itself, it's the entire playing field or sandbox, or however you described it. And in particular, right now, we have, since the Khalil arrest at Columbia, also been trying to really carve out this space in the public conversation, that two things are true at the same time. That anti-Semitism is real, and Jewish students and faculty and staff and others are facing legitimate fears and concerns on campus, and we shouldn't be gaslit into thinking that that's not real. There are some trying to tell us that that isn't real. And at the same time, we do not want to see these legitimate fears and concerns exploited to undermine due process, rule of law, our academic institutions where billions and billions of dollars in cancer and Alzheimer's research and other stuff have been on the chopping block. And we can actually believe that two things are true at the same time. We're capable of holding that nuance. In fact, I think it's where the majority of us are. And so we as JCPA have been out front talking about that quite often since that first arrest in March, but perhaps most notably last month organized a statement of 10 mainstream Jewish legacy organizations, including the conservative, reform, and reconstructionist movements, making clear the same point, bringing together a broad swath of organizations that I think are really reflective of a strong part of the Jewish community, and the polling that's come out since has underscored this, saying that we, again, need to see anti-Semitism confronted in all of its forms wherever it exists, and that we do not want to see these legitimate fears exploited in service of undermining our democracy and our institutions. And that statement itself, I think, really helped make clear both in coalition spaces, for example, JCPA is one of the co-founders of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, which is the preeminent civil rights coalition in the country. I proudly sit on its board. We work in a number of different spaces like that. It's really important that we create the tools and the language to show our partners how we can do both things at the same time. How that in fighting the weaponization of anti-Semitism, they also don't have to give an inch in fighting anti-Semitism itself. And that in fact, one is not possible without the other. And it's important not just for creating space within the Jewish community to hold this complex position, but even more so in certain ways to create space outside of the Jewish community for our partners and allies to understand we can do both things at the same time.
You both mentioned, I think you said fire hose, and you said hot mess. So I think, we all feel that way, depending how much of the news you actually watch or read or listen to. People feel powerless and feel very frustrated that they want to do something, they don't know what to do. What would you suggest people do either in their local communities as an individual, something that we can all, besides the great knowledge you've given us, take away with this sort of a charge? Sounds like a last question, it's not, but go ahead.
I mean, first and foremost, get involved with organizations like the JCRC. I mean, we are going to win these fights, I truly believe, on the local and state levels. We build the democratic resiliency that we need to fight anti-Semitism and broader hate and extremism and protect our communities and our institutions on the state and local levels right now. We build the communities that we need, the coalitions, the bridges. And so being deeply engaged through organizations like the JCRC is so crucial right now in a way that perhaps even a year ago, and it was very, very crucial a year ago, it's even more so now. I also think it's so important to lean into the hard conversations. If you're in this room, right, you're involved deeply in your community, you're a Jewish community leader, you probably are involved in other community institutions, both within and outside of the Jewish community. And the ways in which the zero-sum binary approach to everything we're talking about here, to anti-Semitism, to democracy, right? It is tearing us apart when we need to be building the strongest, broadest coalitions in service of protecting our communities and our democracy. And the way that we actually move forward is leaning into challenging conversations, as my friend Eric Ward likes to say, building the muscle to stay at the table. And we do that by talking to people not only with whom we agree, which I think is a lot easier, but with those on both sides of our political positions with whom we don't agree. And that means having those hard conversations, whether it's through our local politics, our local institutions, on this local school board, whatever it may be, and leaning into them in an open-minded, constructive way that recognizes the only path forward here is one in which we sort of marginalize those extreme voices in both directions and create a coalition of the willing in the middle who are going to be unequivocal in standing up against hate and protecting our democracy right now.
I love all that. And one of the things, Amy, that you just said reminded me of this amazing article. I was just quoting this article a couple of days ago, so I have it fresh in mind. It was actually a speech given by Bernice Johnson Regan, who is one of the members of Sweet Honey in the Rock. I don't know if you're maybe my generation or whatever. Bernice Johnson Regan gave a speech in 1983 called Coalition Politics. And in the speech, she talks about what coalitions are and how important they are. And she draws a really important distinction between home and coalition. And home is where you're with your people, and you're safe, and you're not at risk, and for the most part, people agree with you. And it is really important to have home. But you can't stay at home, because work doesn't happen at home. Work happens in coalition. And coalition, which is those places where people disagree with you, and you are uncomfortable, and you can get hurt, that's like where you need to go to get work done. And then when you're like tired and it's hard and you need a break, you get to go home and be with your people who agree with you and you're safe. But we've got to spend a lot more time, I think you brought up like resisting the binary between thinking that we can spend all of our time with people who agree with us or we're ever going to get everything we want, and spend much more of the time resisting that kind of binary thinking. So that's like job number one. Job number two is super tactical. This is an odd-numbered year, so there aren't big federal elections, but do you know that there are 95,000 seats up for election in the United States in 2025? 95,000, and everyone should vote in every one of them that you're eligible for. Yeah, and once, just once, right? Voting is a habit. The best predictor of a person's vote in an election is whether they voted in the last election. And so building the muscle of civic participation through voting, I think, is absolutely essential. And the third piece of homework that I would give you really echoes what Amy said. Civil society, our network of nonprofit institutions, is the superpower of American democracy. Alexis de Tocqueville didn't use that language, but he saw it when he came to the United States in the early 1800s. Our capacity to self-organize and build power and build community is unparalleled in the world, and you should join, support, encourage the leaders of civil society organizations that you are part of to exercise political courage, get their backs when they do, encourage them to take nuanced positions and support them when they do, even if you're like they're not 100% the thing that you would say. That's an essential role, I think, in this particular political moment.
I'm so glad you brought up elections, because that takes me to my next question because your organization is really engaged in election integrity, protecting voter access, all of those really important issues. So how do we, in this climate, protect and ensure free and fair elections? And I would be remiss if I didn't say there's a really big election, lots of seats, important things in Virginia in November. So we're starting to look, we have a primary in about a month, and then we're going to be headed into election season, which is going to carry a lot of heft, not just to the people of the Commonwealth, but whatever those results are will kind of inform, or often has, the mood of the nation and so forth. So what do you see as the biggest challenges here, and how do we move forward on this really critical goal?
Yeah. So I'm gonna do the easy part first, and then I'm gonna do the part that I told Gil I was gonna do at the beginning. I don't know if Gil's still here, but I said there's a part of this where I'm gonna be like the Grim Reaper, and he was like, "Don't be the Grim Reaper the whole time." So the easy part is vote in every election. It's recruit as many people as you can to serve as poll workers. Not only because there's a massive poll worker shortage in the United States, but also because the more people who are poll workers, the more people of integrity who are poll workers, the more support the election infrastructure has, and the more people are like implicated when it is threatened, right? You can imagine that a local rabbi is much more likely to rise up if there's some kind of threat against a particular election if their congregants are serving as poll workers. So poll working, really important. A third piece of the puzzle, particularly since January 6th, is building relationships with local election officials. Right? There was a time in this country, it was a wonderful time, I loved it, where the election infrastructure was kind of like public utility, right? It was kind of like the sewers, maybe that's not the right analogy, right? Forgive me, but it worked because we didn't see it, and for a lot of complicated reasons that you all, I'm sure, can appreciate, we see it in a much starker way, and the people who did their jobs with tremendous integrity are now a threatened part of our democratic infrastructure, and they need the support of community leaders. So build relationships with them. Do it now, particularly in Virginia, because in 3 months they aren't going to have time to talk to you, but build relationships with them and support them. Now the part that gets a little more unnerving. We won a battle in North Carolina by ending the Supreme Court fight that was happening there for 6 months. And so far the SAVE Act hasn't passed Congress. But those things are rehearsals for a genuine attempt to subvert a United States, a free and fair election. And if and when that happens, there's going to be a moment, it's like a burning of the Reichstag moment, where Americans will need to decide whether they're going to stand for that or not. And I'll hearken back to an amazing historical example of this in Spain in 1979. 5 years, I think, after Franco died, there was a free and fair election, and the Liberal Party won. And the kind of remnants of the Francoist party said, no, we're not gonna hold by this election. And they brought tanks and the military and marched on Parliament. And the head of the Francoist party and the king, who was a member of that party, locked arms with the Liberal Party leaders and stood in the streets and said, no, we're a democracy now. They went to the streets, and it is possible that we will have to do that. And being prepared to do that is a piece of work. So the homework is to revisit the incredible skill set of nonviolent public protest that this country has been a kind of major part of this country's civil rights fight. There are skills and relationships and power that can be built as part of nonviolent public protest that may be a tool we need to take out of our toolkit. I hope we don't. I really hope we don't, but we don't want to need it and not have had it. So that's another homework assignment, and then I'll stop being the Grim Reaper.
Do you have any comments on it? Okay. Well, then I have a question for you, Amy. Disinformation and misinformation, which fuels so much of this, what I'll just call horror. What advice can you give to effectively confront this? And I don't know if we can turn it around, but do you have any suggestions?
Well, look, dis and misinformation, so I'll say disinformation is sort of intentional bad information, oftentimes promoted by political actors, foreign governments and influence campaigns and so on. And misinformation is generally often unintentional. And it's important to note there was so much happening during the election that I think some in our community and certainly the broader society missed the fact that there were deliberate foreign influence disinformation campaigns targeting not just a whole bunch of us, but specifically the Jewish community. Russia ran a very specific disinformation campaign targeting the Jewish community aimed at pitting us against one another, pitting us against the Black community, immigrants, and so many other different communities, which never mind the fact that our own community is actually quite diverse, and when we think about things in such reductive terms, it's harmful in that way. And there's a DOJ indictment that folks can read from, I think, September. It's worth really reading it because it's a reminder that so much of what we're seeing online and more broadly, including, frankly, in some of the WhatsApp and Facebook groups that we're all in right now post-October 7th because we need that community, some of it's not real and some of it is unintentional misinformation, but some of it is very intentional disinformation aimed at riling us up, aimed at making the Jewish community feel isolated and alone, aimed at pitting us against others, and ultimately aimed at making us believe that democracy doesn't serve us. And we need to be really clear-eyed about that. There are things that we can do. So we work with a number of organizations. I'm on the board of something called PERIL right here at American University, the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab, which does extraordinary work aimed at sort of inoculating not just kids, but all of us against disinformation, extremism online. We work with organizations like the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which also does really important work on this front. And I did a webinar with Imran, who's the CEO, about a month or so after October 7th. He's a British Muslim man. I'm a Jewish American woman. And we had this very frank conversation about the different dis and misinformation that was being targeted at our communities in the aftermath of October 7th, and the tools that we have to not give oxygen to the worst actors. Our instinct is to quote tweet or share something on Facebook when we see someone attacking Israel or spreading anti-Semitism, right? Our instinct is to want to share that and push back. But when we actually share it, we're fueling an algorithm that lifts up that bad information and that extremism. And so there's very practical tools that webinar I think is on our website, but that our partners at places like Peril and CCDH and elsewhere use. And I think what we can particularly do on the state and local levels through our school boards, through our communal institutions and more, is promote media and digital literacy. Not just for our kids, but frankly for all of us, because we are all susceptible to this. There are curricular, there are programs and tools that we could be advancing to make sure that we are all equipped to be more discerning consumers of social media and of this broader ecosystem in which we know this dis and misinformation has become so pervasive. And so we're not powerless, we just have to be very clear-eyed about the reality, very skeptical, which I think we as Jews are oftentimes pretty good at being, and advance the sorts of policies that we need to actually inoculate and protect ourselves.
Thank you, and we could go on all night, but we won't. And I just want to say a huge Toda Rabah. Thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation. And we very much appreciate both of you coming to join us tonight. And we hope we will see you again soon.